Thank you for joining us today. This is a hybrid program, which is a little bit different. So there are a few people in the room, and then there's all of you at home. So thank you for joining us, whether in person or online. I am delighted to be able to present today. My name is Allison DePrey Singleton. I am the Genealogy Services Manager here at the Genealogy Center. I have been researching family history for 25 years now, and it is a true joy. I absolutely love helping people and digging through the past and learning more about people, and especially those elusive female ancestors. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the ways that we can find information on them. So today we're going to talk about tracing her footsteps, discovering female ancestors. Now, one of the things with female ancestors is that they left less clues for us. They didn't always have as many records that were available, but that doesn't mean we can't find them. It just means that we have to get more creative. You know, not everybody has a extensive, perhaps criminal record. And so they're not going to have that information in those records, those court records. Or perhaps they weren't really wealthy and were able to buy land. So then you're not able to find those in property records. But when you're looking for women, there's other ways to find them. So let's discuss. Okay, why is it harder? I think it's really important to note. Well, the name change is a big one. I think that's the one that everybody can agree is probably the biggest hurdle of all, is you don't necessarily have that marriage record that has the maiden name. So sometimes you have to be a little creative to find it. Now, the change in names sometimes can be easier when you do have those records that trace it, like those marriage records or even probate records. But sometimes you don't have that, so we have to get creative. Fewer legal and property records. So a lot of times women weren't allowed to own property. They couldn't inherit property. So looking for the women in these types of records can prove to be difficult. And honestly, women had fewer legal rights, and that's a big part of the problem. If you look at any of the histories of women's rights in any state, you're going to have to look at the state level or country level if you're doing research in another location. Every place is different. And I think that is the biggest thing that we forget and a huge hurdle for our research. We need to take a step back and say, okay, what were the laws in this specific place at this specific time? And how would they have impacted my ancestor? So if you're looking for those elusive women, that's a really good place to look. And honestly, there's just underrepresentation in those official records. So you are going to have juries, and they're typically going to be of men, and you're going to have those records. Now, at a certain point, women were allowed to serve on juries, but you have to figure out when that was in the location. There's a lot of research that's involved beyond just looking for them. So I gave you guys a couple examples in the handout. And one of the things that I like to do is to give you different resources that could potentially help you find that information. This one is a Library of Congress research guide, and I think it's so cool that you can actually go through and it talks about the historic rights of women during specific time periods. And you can even see we have the when women were jurors here. That's a really good example. Now, this is not going to be the be-all end-all guide, because again, every place was different. Even specific locations had different laws. So you have to be so particular about looking at your place. And you can see what we have here. You can go to state law resources and say, okay, I want to know what the property laws were. When could they own property? What laws were there? And this gives you kind of an overview of several different places that you can go back to and say, all right, that could help. I also love that they include women lawyers. I think that's kind of interesting as well. And you can look up the state suffrage laws. So when did they have rights to vote? Because voting records could be a way to find your elusive women as well. You have to get creative. Okay, so let's go back. All right, so the other thing is to look at the different laws that existed. And sometimes that includes looking up a quick guide for that state, or we're going to talk about some more creative ways in a little bit, and we're going to do some examples. And I think you might be surprised at how you might be able to find some of this information without having to study law, go to a law library, or contact an attorney. One of the big things that we need to remember is to think like a detective. A lot of times women were involved in more things than we initially think. A lot of times we think of our female ancestors as being a homemaker and nothing else. We don't think about the fact that she interacted with other people. Perhaps she was a part of church organizations. Perhaps she was a part of social organizations. And then you also have to look at that fan club. So who was she interacting with? Who are those friends? Who are the people that she is talking to on a regular basis? What about those associates? Perhaps she is a member of a church group. Maybe she is a member of an organization or some sort of fraternity organization. There's many out there. And what about those neighbors? So many times we have these women and we pigeonhole them into a specific location and a specific time and think they can't move and they can't have other things outside of the house. And I think that is something that we need to reconsider because many of the records that we can find on women are actually quite interesting and broader than you would think. So a lot of times you can find more information about the women by tracing through others in her life. And actually, I can give you an example from today. I ended up helping someone who was looking for information on their grandmother, did not know the grandmother's parents, could not find a document with the grandmother's parents on it. There was no marriage record. There was nothing in the obituary. There was nothing in the census. She wasn't showing up there. So the way we went about it was in the obituary, we were able to find siblings. And then the siblings' obituaries named more siblings. And then we were able to find them through that. So taking another person and researching that person, which was a sibling, a brother, brought us to the parents, and we were able to confirm it. And that happened today. So this is a challenge that people have on a daily basis. So what are some of these strategies for success? Well, use both maiden and married names if you know both. And sometimes think creatively. Sometimes our female ancestors, without us knowing ahead of time, may have been married previously. So perhaps the marriage that we know about is their second marriage or even third marriage, and nobody talked about previous marriages. Perhaps the first husband died young and there weren't any children or other clues that could tell us that. So you have to be thinking about the different ways the names could be slightly off. And one of the big things that I want to recommend is to use timelines. Because when you actually sit down and go through a woman's life and try to find all of the impactful moments in her life, you can put those clues together a little bit better. Now, as a part of the handout, I included a worksheet, and it is her life timeline. This is just one example of a timeline you can use, and everybody's brain works differently. So this may not be the best way for you to do it. Google timelines for genealogy. There are so many out there. You can also find just by getting into an Excel spreadsheet and putting that information together. So having that year, having that event, and just tracing where she is and what she's doing. That can help you piece together the clues that you've been finding, but maybe haven't put the puzzle together to figure out the pieces that are missing. A big thing that I think is helpful too is within that timeline to make sure you always have the residence. So have maybe even a separate timeline just for where she lived. Again, you're going to want to use that fan club, the friends, associates, and neighbors. So knowing where she lives and the people that surround her and in her community, that's going to help you research further and understanding what that community was like. So making sure that you do that historical context research as well. Now, records that can reveal her story. I mean, you can find some amazing pieces through marriage and church records. And I mentioned church records as maybe a society or a group that she could have been a part of. So it may not be your typical baptism or christening or a marriage record or a burial. It could be something like a missionary society, or perhaps it was a ladies' group, or perhaps they even had like a sewing club that was a part of the church where they could get together and have fellowship. There are so many different ways that they could have had socialization through their church. And I think that is something that we forget because we're so focused on those birth, marriage, death records within those church records. And we need to expand it to what sort of social groups were in those churches and where are those records? Do those records still exist? Probate and land documents. Now, many times women couldn't own property, and perhaps they didn't have legal rights to different pieces of their lives, but that's okay. Sometimes they're still named in the records. Maybe they're not named as someone who's inheriting something or a piece of land, but they're named as the spouse of, or they could be the widow of. So sometimes the names are in there. We just have to get creative. And then newspapers and obituaries. Now, again, with that example that I gave earlier, it was not the female ancestor that gave us the information, it was her brother. And in order to find her brother, we had to find her obituary, which did not name her parents, which was very unhelpful at the time. But we were able to find more information through that sibling. So looking at those obituaries for everybody in the family, not just the woman, not just her husband, everybody. Now, these are some underutilized records and sources. Community cookbooks and yearbooks. So cookbooks are a little bit of a passion of mine. I think they are so fascinating, and I love looking through them. So many times different organizations, societies, churches, etc., would put together cookbooks as a fundraiser, and they would have individuals from the organization or church submit recipes and they would put their name under it. And sometimes they would have notes or it would have a little bit more information about the family in the recipes sections. So you can learn a little bit about these women and what they were doing through cookbooks and finding their names and knowing they were a part of that society. And yearbooks are incredibly helpful. So many societies actually had yearbooks or membership lists. Perhaps you have an ancestor that was in the Order of the Eastern Star. That could be something that could be helpful to your research. Women lived full, rich lives where they were interacting with so many others in the community, and there's records of that. So those women's clubs and auxiliary rosters, those are just gold. And sometimes there might be something on their tombstone that gives an indication to what society they might have been a member of. I recommend looking and looking again and look at what the husband is a member of, because many times they are more likely to put the membership for the man on the gravestone or in the obituary, and maybe they don't put it for the wife, but she could have been part of the auxiliary group. Now, with these groups, something to keep in mind is a lot of times they included information if somebody passed away. They might do a donation to the family, or they might have some sort of dedication to them. So make sure that you are checking those records. Lastly, I have on here, it's a big category, oral histories, Bibles, and scrapbooks. Now, the oral histories, it's hit or miss whether or not you're going to find an oral history specifically on your family. And that's a relatively new concept in a lot of different ways. However, you might be able to find an oral history on a woman in the community where your ancestors from. And especially if you don't know the community very well, if you don't know the key players in the community, the organizations, etc., if you can find something on that, an oral history, listen to it. See if it can give you other ideas of where to look. Each community is different. Bibles are such a wonderful tool. They are hard to find sometimes. Occasionally, you have to take the time to do a little bit of research to see what other lines the Bible could have gone down. So when we inherit from our family, you can't give a Bible to all 5 of their kids. They're going to give it to one of them. And then they're not going to give the Bible to all 3 of their kids. They're going to give it to one of them. And then it goes down from there. So sometimes it requires a little bit of extra research to figure out who might have that Bible or what repository it might have ended up in. Sometimes you can find them in a different location, far away from where your family settled, just because the descendants moved there. Get creative. And scrapbooks. Scrapbooks are so much fun to go through, and sometimes you can find them digitized. I cannot express enough how important it is to Google. Put the woman's name in quotations and do a Google search. I know that sounds incredibly simplistic, but you never know what somebody else has put online. Even if it is a mention of its existence in a library or a repository or even an individual's house, it will potentially give you a clue. Now, modern tools for research. These are just a few examples, and we're going to get into a little bit more of what you might want to do. But starting off with family search and ancestry, these are really easy places to start. But I want to challenge you. Look in specific collections. Don't just search all of Ancestry. Don't just search all of Family Search. Go into the catalogs. There's a card catalog in Ancestry. There's a catalog in Family Search. Go into them and explore the locations where your ancestor lived. Try to figure out what collections could specifically pertain to them, and then get creative with the searches. When you're searching a specific collection, you're already narrowing the results, meaning you're not going to be looking through millions upon millions of records. You're going to be looking in maybe 100,000 records. And then if you start just looking for maybe the specific first name and an exact location, you might actually get some hits. Get creative. DNA testing. Now, I know a lot of you have probably tried to do DNA testing to see what you can find, but I recommend digging a little bit further. Now, my colleague, who's actually on here right now, Sarah, has given many presentations about how you can look at the matches and dig further and learn more about where these ancestors are. And I highly, highly recommend going to her classes and or watching the ones recorded on our YouTube page. When given permission, our programs go online. So look at them. Learn how to specifically use this tool to find those elusive women. Now, the last one, social media genealogy groups. So what's really fun about these programs and what I really enjoy is that in the chat, the conversation, the sharing, the collaborating is amazing. I've seen people find family members in the chat. I've seen people be able to help one another and give very specific resources. You can do that through social media as well. And there's specific groups out there. If you get on a social media platform, the most popular is probably Facebook. You can do a search for a specific group. You can look for, hey, I'm looking in this little town in Idaho. Look for that town and put history after it. I know for a fact in Fort Wayne, there's a Fort Wayne and Allen County history group, and people share photographs, they share stories, they share all sorts of things. And then other people get in there and share their own stories, and they're collaborating and building this story on this picture or event or some question that someone has. You can do that too. The thing is, you're never really at a stopping point when you're doing genealogy research. You stop when you want to stop, when you're frustrated. Keep asking questions and ask people for help, because sometimes it just takes a different perspective to get you to think about it differently. We're good at that. If you ever have the urge to have someone take a look at your brick wall, we've done that and we're happy to do that. We want people to be successful. Now, I did want to mention that I think it is a very important thing that once you do find those elusive female ancestors, to honor her legacy. They were difficult to find, but not impossible. So write and share her story. Something that we really encourage is sharing stories. And it doesn't have to be write down like a book. You don't have to do a professional book or anything. Maybe just jot down some notes that go with your research. Jot down how you found her. Jot down what the clues were that led you to finding her and the information you were seeking. Some people are really techie, and building a digital memorial could be something really fun. And maybe that's the thing that would help you, that would make this interesting to you. And building a digital memorial, if you build something and you put it online, other people can find it. So if you've already found answers that you are seeking, you could potentially help someone find the answers before they have to go through all the work you did. And display family stories. I think it's wonderful when you can actually give these life, put them on your wall. You can put maybe something in a frame, get creative. I love seeing how people display family stories and family histories. Sometimes people just get the pictures and hang them up in a tree shape on their wall. But giving them a little bit of life sometimes makes people ask more questions. And by asking questions, you learn. And that's a great way to share. It is important to note that you are her legacy. If that's your ancestor, your research is bringing back her voice. She's not lost anymore. And I think that's incredibly important to note. When we're looking for people and it's so frustrating that we can't find them over and over and over again, having that moment where we can say, hey, I figured this out, share it. Because that is her story. That is her voice. So I want you guys to muse upon this. And I'm actually going to change the screen that is being shared while you guys muse. But think about, what stories have you already uncovered? And if you want, share it in the chat. I think that would be amazing. I've already seen some people talking about recipes, cookbooks, and other things that they're looking for. But share what your success stories are and what has worked for you, because everybody's story is different. And everybody's journey to find this information is so different. So one thing that I really want you guys to look at is the fact that we have AI. So when we have the tools, that is the important part. Always utilize the tools that are available to you. And one thing that we have that is new and has been exploding is AI. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is at home, get into an AI. You can go to Claude, you can go to ChatGPT, you can go to whatever one you want. There's several out there. My personal favorite is ChatGPT for this. Some people do prefer Claude. They are in your handout, the links are. But what I think is really fun and unusual that you may not think to do is you can ask ChatGPT to help you with your research on finding these elusive female ancestors. So we're going to do a quick search. So the first thing I want to do is I want to learn about the property laws. So let's say I want to learn, okay, if a woman dies in 1890 in, let's say, Kansas, and she is a widow, who inherits, there we go, her property? So what it's going to do is it's going to search online. It's going to look at the intestate succession laws. It's going to talk about will. Now, the big thing to note, ChatGPT can make mistakes. All of them can. But this is a start. All right, so we have some ideas. Okay. She had, let's say, 3 minor children. So then this is what's happening. So we have no will, intestate succession. We have if the property was originally her husband's, and then a summary. So we can also say, give me sources. All right, we have sources. So then what you can do is take a look at what these sources are and see if this is something that you agree with. Because as we know as researchers, a lot of times it's about where the information comes from. So we have this information and it may be accurate, but we want to know more. Okay, so let's say we want, give me sources from universities and historical societies. Now it's going to search those specifically. So now we have specific sources based on the question that I just asked. And it started with a very simple question. If a woman dies in 1890 in Kansas and is a widow, who inherits her property? This is something so simple, and yet I'm already learning more, and it's summarized pretty quickly that I can then take this information and go, okay, so if that's the case, I need to look for X. Okay, so what's interesting is you can then say, okay, here's the laws at the time. Okay, we'd have to look for a legal guardian or conservator. And all right, so we'd have to look for that. So the next thing you can say is, where would the records be from this time period? So now they're going to start telling me where I can look for the records. So if I don't know this information, this is where it's going to give me specifics for the location I'm researching. Now I'm looking at Kansas, and I always think that it's interesting to choose a location outside of my research focus. So Kansas isn't a place that I do a ton of research. I have, but it's not a place that I do a ton. So it's interesting to look at this and see what they come up with. So we have other helpful sources. And it's interesting to see, okay, we have different things that could be online. So what digitized records are there? Now, I know when you guys signed up for this program, you may not have thought that you'd be seeing AI in use for this, but I think this is one of the best tools to help with elusive ancestors, especially women. Because many times we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what the laws are. We don't know how things are inherited. We don't know what records would exist for her. Now, this is one whole line of information, and it tells me where I can find different pieces, which I think is really fun. And it's giving me the actual citations. So I can click on them and start looking for these records. We have alphabetical by party's last name. Beautiful. So what if we have a different type of question? What if we cannot find our ancestor? They disappeared. So let's say we have somebody that disappeared. We can actually ask, in, let's pick a different place. Let's do Defiance County, Ohio. And if you guys are at home, please, please, please play with this. Start asking it questions. So the first thing it's doing is it's telling me, okay, double check that 1870 census. And then they're giving clues of where to go next. So they're telling us, okay, there could be marriages, name variants, death and burial records, local newspapers, court and land records, family and community connections. So it's basically everything we've already talked about as an overview. But sometimes it is incredibly helpful to have a step-by-step list of instructions specific to your research question. And that's what this is doing. This is giving you a roadmap that you may not have had before. Now we're all here, we're in this presentation. You guys are here because there's somebody you're looking for. And we're always looking for clues or ideas or different ways that we might think about how we can find someone. And this is just a new and different tool that we can use. Now, this is just an entire thing on asking it questions. You can put in specific information as well. If you wanted it to, you could tell it to try and find people. We could do find anything on Rosa DePrey from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And it may not. There we go. Okay, so this is actually correct. So it's pulling information from the Genealogy Center, which is helpful, and Family Search. And so it's pulling information that is factually correct. So then I can go in and it's a clue. It is a clue that I can use. Now, speaking of Family Search, I don't know if you guys have played around with this, but Family Search has a fun tool called full text search. Now, on Tuesday, one of my colleagues did an entire presentation on that, and it's going to be online soon. But I did want to show you, this is another way to find those elusive women. You don't have to just be searching the search and searching the records. You don't have to just search the family tree. You can search the full text. Now, with everything, with all this AI stuff, with everything that's new, there's going to be issues. Even when we do a search in Ancestry, and Ancestry has been around for quite some time, there's always errors. There can be misspellings, there can be transcription errors, there can be something else off. So you have to be creative with how you search. But I'm going to put Rose's name in here again. I want to see what happens if I look her up this way. Because what's interesting about Rosa, and Rosa is actually from my family, she was considered the black sheep. I love black sheep. She decided to get married and divorced, which was a big no-no at the time. And then she proceeded to marry again a few times. But my favorite was the fact that she married someone that was 25 years younger than her up in Chicago. So nobody talked about her name. And she just disappeared from family history until I found more records about her. So you have to get creative with how you search. So I'm doing different types of searches, and you can see that it's pulling up the words separately. So if you want to pull it together, you need to put it into quotations. So it doesn't like Rose. It doesn't like Rosa. But maybe I can do her father. No, Victor doesn't come up either. So Jane. See, and that's the problem, is sometimes even if you know they're in here with the quotations, it doesn't pull it. Now, another thing you can do is start playing around with the spelling without the quotations. And it doesn't even like that as well. The fun part is no matter how many times you do these different searches, something new pops up. Oh, this is actually the person. So it's a probate record, and it goes through the individuals. And it's going to name all the people in the family. And luckily, it's typewritten. So we have all of these pieces of information. So we have Mary over there. There's Jane. There's Edward. It's going to be Josephine, August. And look at that. Rosa doesn't have a last name. They didn't know who her last husband was because she was such a black sheep. Now, to be fair, I found it later. But isn't that crazy? And she doesn't show up if you search for Rosa DePrey. She only shows up if you look for other people. And I also think it's funny she only got like $5, but that's really kind of entertaining. She didn't have a last name. And that's a lot of the problems when we do this type of research, is the women don't have last names. Okay. So another thing that you can do, so we have Rosa, And we went through here after looking here, and we saw a clue that there might be something in Family Search, and there might be something on the Genealogy Center's website. But perhaps we're looking for something else to do with them. Maybe we want to know if there's any sort of societies or groups that women were a part of. You can ask that. And I do recommend starting a new chat every time you look for something, because it's going to save it in your account. And what it's going to do is it's going to make it easier for you to go back to it. It's basically giving you research notes. It's collecting your research notes and organizing them for you. Again, I cannot stress how much I love using AI, because you can ask it anything. Now, I will, again, just caution you. AI is a tool. It is absolutely not a replacement for research. It is absolutely not a replacement for you. You can ask it questions, but verify it with facts. One of the things we can do is, what kind of societies existed for women in New York City in 1880? And then it's going to go through. Now, I picked a very large city just because I thought it would be interesting, but it's going to give you an idea of the types of societies that might have existed. So we have charitable and benevolent societies, educational and professional, social reform and suffrage, ethnic, religious, and mutual aids, cultural and arts societies. And these are just a few. And you can ask for it to get more specific. Perhaps you know more about your ancestor. Maybe you know that they were Irish immigrants. We can add that. Well, let's do narrow to. Now, the fun part is you don't have to actually type in complete sentences, and you don't have to capitalize properly. You can just tell it what to do. But now it's going to give you ones that are very specific to Irish immigrants. And then these are things that you can start to look for the records of. But let's say, okay, you do want to find the records. Awesome. Where are the records for? So now they're going to tell you where they are and how to contact them. So this is something that can make your life just a little bit easier. Now, when I was putting together the handout, I wanted to definitely talk about AI and talk about the different resources that are available to you with the AI overlay with the Family Search, full text search, and everything else that we have. But I did put some other online resources in there, and I would be silly not to show you just a couple. And one of them is on our website. I have to tell you, Percy is still an incredible resource for looking for your elusive ancestors. It's on our website, genealogycenter.org. Down, go to Percy, and then you can start looking. Now, Percy's not an every name index, so the articles are not completely indexed. It's the indexing of the titles of the articles. So you have to get a tiny bit creative, but you can find things. So let's say we're looking in Florida, and we'll just pick Dade. What you want to do is see what could potentially impact a woman's life in all of these. And to be perfectly honest, most of them can. So you want to see, okay, history. What do we have here? Okay, they have actors, they have all sorts of stuff. So what happens if I start to type woman or women? I just typed in WOM. I don't want to type in the whole word because it'll limit my search. I want woman and women. And now look at that. I have a women's college, Pioneer Women, Oxwoman. I have questions about that. Women's Relief Association, Women's Overseas Service League photo, Women's Society meeting, and Young Women's Christian Association in Miami. Those are all things that could potentially be helpful to my research. So make sure that you're checking Percy. The other online resources, there's definitely potential for finding things. Chronicling America, you have newspapers. DPLA, you're going to be looking for archival records. And HathiTrust or HathiTrust, however you wish to pronounce it, that's going to be those books that you can find that have been digitized, as well as the Internet Archive. You have the possibility to find your ancestors anywhere. But a good old-fashioned Google search can look in a lot of those. So if you go to Rosa DePrey and do Fort Wayne, I'm already finding information on her. And it's going back to some of the stuff that I already found through doing a AI search, through doing the family search, full text search. It's going to give me a little bit of that information. So I really wanted you guys to see some examples of that. I want to leave enough time for questions, and I have been watching that there are quite a few. I can continue to do examples, but I'd really love for you guys at home to be trying some of these techniques and to be expanding the different resources that you are looking at and considering for finding the women who you cannot find. I'm going to open up the chat really quick and the Q&A. Okay, so what do you do when female is not mentioned in father or brother's obits or wills? Don't know if died, married after the 1920 census. Poof, she is gone. She is 18 and on farm with father and brothers. Mother passed away in 1915. Oh my goodness. I'm intrigued that she's not mentioned in the father or the brother's obituaries or wills. Died or married after the 1920 census. So if she disappeared between 1920 and 1930, and the mother's deceased, I would 100% start looking to see if she got married. And I would look beyond where she lived. So there is a good possibility that if her mother had already passed about 5 years before, so she was about 13, maybe she eloped. Maybe she went to a Gretna Green. Maybe she went to a different state to get married. So I think there could be some benefit to searching the family search full text. I would also ask the AI, ChatGPT or Claude, I would ask it where someone would have gotten married in that location where she was living. Do you have YouTube programs about using cookbooks for research or other purposes? Yes, we do. There are a couple of them online, and you can access those through our website. So I'm going to go to our website again, and I'm going to minimize these. Okay, so on our website, if you go up to the corner where you see this little play button, and it will load here in a moment. This is taking you to our YouTube page. These are going to be the videos that have been most recently uploaded, and you'll see a new one probably on Saturday. But if you want to search them, you go to the Allen County Public Library link right there and click this little magnifying glass, and you can put in recipe. And here you go. We have some information on recipes and cookbooks and etc. Is there a way to see if my ancestor was involved in any society groups, movements like the suffrage movement? Looking for the records. Now, what's really fun is the newspapers are really helpful for this too, because they were talking about the women and what they were doing, because sometimes it was a little taboo. And so sometimes they would end up in court records because of it. Sometimes it would be a listing of the organization. So there was the president, the vice president. It depended on how it was organized. So I would start looking in newspapers and I would start looking to see what suffrage movements were occurring in the location where she lived. You can learn more that way. What are the best sources for finding female ancestors in the late 1700 to mid 1800 era? The best resources? Oh goodness. Basically, I would start by asking more information about your specific female ancestors that you're seeking and putting that into the AI, because it's going to be different for each location. I cannot just say, oh, the best place to look is these specific records without knowing exactly where they lived and what was going on in that time period, what the laws were. It requires a little bit of background research. And so to bypass some of that background research, we go to AI now, which is incredibly helpful. Let's see here. Would AI be helpful for Germany records? Why, yes, it would. Do you know what's really interesting about AI and what I've been really fascinated with is the translation function of it is amazing. So let's look. We can go into here and say, okay, how can I find records in Germany in 1884. So now it's going to give me some basics. And then once you have the town, the place, the names, you can start putting in a little bit more information. So are you looking for that civil registration? Are you looking for the church records? And notice how they're already giving you the words in German. And they're giving you some online resources already. So make sure to check. You absolutely can get help with your overseas records this way. This is absolutely an amazing resource for that. How can I find information on a woman prior to marriage? I have two official stamped marriage certificates, same marriage, but slight differences. And father's name, I cannot find any info on her or her parents as listed on the marriage certificate. No census records, no birth record, no death record for parents. Oh, I wonder who filled out that marriage certificate and if it was 100% correct. So, depending on the time period, the first thing I would be doing is looking to see if there's any woman of that name in a census record, because she may show up there. And sometimes I'll just look for the first name. Maybe I'll just bypass the last name. That may be the issue. It also could be something to do with maybe sometimes I've seen it where the fathers passed away, and when they went around and did the census, all the entire family, even the kids from the first father, would have the stepfather's name. And that just makes it so much harder to research. So look for the woman's first name in the exact location where she got married and see if that gives you an idea, because there might be something going on with that family house and what's going on with her her home life. Do you have any tips on finding former female enslaved ancestors? I have some information on great grandmothers in late 1800s in Indian Territory, Oklahoma. Yes. Yes. That's amazing. Okay, so late 1800s, Indian Territory. So we're talking probably what, 1880s, 1870s. The 1870 census is just amazing. So if you're trying to find more information going back from there, you want to take all the clues you have. You're going to be making charts. You're going to make a chart of everybody that's in her household, everybody that she is associated with. And you want to know everything for that 1870 census, everything for that 1880 census, and everything in between. And then you're going to go back from there. Now, you know that they are in Indian Territory, which is very interesting to me. So the records there are a little bit different. So what you want to do is, again, go into AI and ask. Ask it how the records are different and how you can search them and what they suggest you look for. But mainly, I go through charts and I try to find the closest location to where they lived. Because a lot of times from the end of the Civil War to 1870, there's not a lot of movement. There's some, but there's not a lot. So they're typically still in the area where they were enslaved. And that's what you are hoping for in a way, so you can pinpoint where they were. We have so many questions here. Any tips for help with elusive female ancestor with the same maiden name and living in the same area as another female in the same area of Delaware, Maryland, born prior to 1850, died at 1879? Cannot determine which is mine. Ooh, that's a good one. Honestly, I would trace both. It looks like you've already started, but I would do a deep dive on both of them as far as you can. And again, do that search on Family Search full text, see if there's another clue there, and then also look at the people that surround this female ancestor and see if any of those people, so from what you're looking at two different women. So look at all those people and see which ones actually are associated with the person that you are related to, because you know her end of life information. So something has to be a string that connects it. So trying to figure out what that string is what I would be looking for. Okay. Do you guys have any questions in the room, just out of curiosity? Okay, just want to make sure. Did you have one? So changing the names around and having having that be part of the issue with finding that ancestor, right?
It's different names for the same person.
Yep. And that's part of the frustration. And I think it's also interesting if you look at the different customs that surround names too. A lot of times you'll find there's different customs of giving a first and a middle name, and the children always go by the middle name instead of that first name. But then they move here and they pick which one they want, or they switch them. And so sometimes it can be incredibly frustrating when you're looking for that person, and it's just putting those pieces together and figuring out if it's the same one. But yeah, that is a frustration. 100% agree. I see another question in here. How do I get records for a now closed mental institution in the 1950s? Well, it depends. I would ask AI. That's my first recommendation, where those records might exist, but you might have your hands tied with HIPAA and you might not be able to access those records. But it's worth a shot. It is absolutely worth a shot to look and see who might own those records. And then let's do this one, and then I think we're done for today because we've gone over time just by a smidge. I have a female ancestor who didn't show up on the passenger list with her parents and younger siblings when they immigrated from Germany to New Orleans in 1852, but she turns up on the 1860 and later censuses. Why would she be missing from the passenger list if it was prepared in Bremen, Germany, her port of departure? Would she have arrived on a later ship? That is entirely possible. It was expensive to travel, and sometimes they traveled piecemeal. Sometimes the people would stay behind and come later, or perhaps she was finishing up the family's business in Germany and came over later. She maybe needed to close up the home, whatever it may be. There are a million reasons why someone would have traveled at a different time. It could have purely been financial too. Maybe they needed to make a little extra money in the US and send it back. So there's a lot of different possibilities. So I would recommend looking to see if it's a later ship and see if there's some suggestions of which ones might have gone from Bremen to New Orleans between 52 and 60. So that is the end of today's presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am delighted to see so many of you here today. And please feel free to reach out with any questions you might have. We can absolutely try to help come up with a game plan for searching for some of these elusive ancestors. So Thank you. I hope you have a great night and hope to see you at our next program.